We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. I'm Christina Giordano, a partnerships manager at AllVoices. Our goal is to give you the tools to create a psychologically safe workplace. A lot of corporate employers are shifting to a hybrid approach or a fully remote workforce. So what does that mean for company culture without in-person happy hours, ping pong tables, and free meals? In this interview series, we're exploring how companies can proactively foster an inclusive environment by creating that psychological safe space and a culture of authentic feedback. We know that employers who don't value their employees end up getting employees who are leaving the company, and this impacts everyone and the bottom line. The Society for Human Resources Management estimates the average cost to replace an employee is about 6 to 9 months of their salary. Here with us today, we have Tom Floyd at Flouracity. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Christina, I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to just dive in, and if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently working on at Flouracity.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tom. I'm the founder of Flouracity. Flouracity is a word I invented, actually, that means the state of flourishing, which is just something that over the past several years, I didn't feel like I was seeing or hearing from enough people who felt like they were flourishing, that they felt like they were in the role they were supposed to be in, or on the career track they wanted to be on, or in life being like, is this really what I want to be when I grow up? Am I doing that? And Flouracity is essentially a professional development company that three different areas that really focus on diversity and inclusion, learning and development, and talent management. So the consulting, the program development and product development and coaching that goes around that. And what excites me right now, that's such a tough question because there's many things that excite me. I would say one of them has been the intersection of diversity and inclusion and the other two. I think in a lot of people organizations, it can be easy to be like, okay, you've got your diversity and inclusion team, you've got your learning and development team, you've got your talent team. And what can unintentionally happen, like always with the best intent, is that specific things get created, very fancy word things, products, processes, systems, all that stuff gets created in each of those areas, but they're not connected. And when we can, if we can bring the three of them together as a Venn diagram and really merge them, there's so much potential there to really help people see how everything fits together. And I've had several engagements in the past 7 or 8 months, really, that are focused on that intersection where we're able to weave them together. So that has really excited me.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. There's so many things to be excited about right now, a lot of great work that you're doing with a variety of different companies. And I like the Venn diagram image of just, it's not just one department's responsibility to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And just we're all working towards this goal of creating this really thriving and evolving company culture. So I would love to know from your perspective, what is company culture? How do you define it? Who's responsible for it? What are your thoughts?
It's such a fuzzy concept and word, right? Like when we hear it, you're like, culture. What is that? Can I grab it? Can I feel it? Like, what really is it? And I think there's a lot of different definitions that people use for it. How I typically think of it is I think it really comes down to the beliefs and the behaviors and really importantly, the values that shape how we interact with each other at work and how we work with each other. And something else that always strikes me about culture is I think that there's often like two kind of subcategories within it of what's explicit and what's implicit. I know a question I always like to ask when I'm starting work with new companies is when I ask about culture, how they would describe it. Sometimes I'll just ask it in kind of a consulting way. Other times I'll ask it in a playful way. And if I'm getting playful with it, I might say, so if you hired me tomorrow, what are the things that I would need to know that you would tell me, yeah, here's some things you need to know about my culture. And you would be like, A, B, and C. But then if I said, okay, well, if we went for drinks later tonight,
Mhm.
that's a non-COVID world. We're sitting at the bar. I have a dirty martini. I love dirty martinis. And I looked at you and said, okay, what won't people tell me here about what I need to be, what I need to do to be successful? And you take a sip of your drink and you're like, okay, look, kid, here's three things you need to know here about how we work. Until my voice changes, you get the cigarette. That's kind of how I think about it, is there's the things that we would know that are on posters that people talk about, things like that. And there are the other things that we might not know, that we might learn through trial and error over time. And one of those things that I know we'll be talking about today that comes up for me is feedback. Like, what do we do with feedback here in our culture? Is feedback something that we view positively? Is it something that we're like, ooh, we don't give feedback? Is it someplace in the middle? There's so much there around feedback, and that is typically in one specific dimension of how that behavior around giving feedback and the value we place on giving feedback and things like that can come up.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of cultures, a lot of company cultures really value feedback and they say that they do. But when you go for that drink after work, it's like, okay, well, this manager really doesn't give good feedback. Not good at receiving feedback. So maybe don't share that actually. And it's just the practices in place they're different and there's a disalignment there as well. But it's important to know for the culture you're joining to what the team dynamic is. And I know in our previous conversation, we talked about there are different types of feedback at organizations. And one of the questions that we had was really, what are the key ingredients to making sure that you foster a workplace, especially in this remote world where that manager feedback, that one-on-one or team feedback is given? What are your thoughts there?
It really does start with setting the expectation, I think, culturally. When I think of feedback, 'cause that word can also feel big for us. And for a lot of people, if you even say, the F word, not the one some of you might be thinking about, feedback, like we're all like, ooh, here it comes. I'm bracing myself. I'm all right. What am I not doing well? And feedback kind of has a bum rap based on that. And I think about category of feedback is company feedback, really, company and employee experience feedback. Like, what feedback do people have about their experience working at the company that everybody within the company needs to take seriously? So that's one category. Another category I think about is, kind of issues in the workplace. When I need to share critical feedback because I am in crisis, or I'm facing something like discrimination, or I'm facing something like sexual harassment. And when I say facing, it might be I'm on the receiving end. Mm-hmm. It might be I witnessed it, I saw it, and it might also be if we use discrimination as an example, I realize I did it and I'm freaking out. It wasn't my intention, but upon reflection, I think I just did something that wasn't okay and I need feedback. I need to talk about that. I think another category, two other categories, there's team feedback. Like, what is a team member's experience on their team, and is the team healthy and thriving? And the fourth one is that one that makes us go, ooh, a lot is, what feedback do you have on me as an employee? What am I doing well? What should I keep doing? What are some of the things I can continue to do and grow, or to make an even different impact, or some of the opportunities for me? What's my performance feedback, the dreaded one of all that we all have to go through once a year? So I kind of think of it in those different categories. Overall, I think it really starts with, we have to place a value on voice. We want to hear from you. And every senior leader in the company, regardless of their function, needs to be talking about that. I think if we go to a specific place where we're talking about an employee engagement survey or something like that, we also have to ask about what are the behaviors that allow you to express your voice? Are you able to do that? Do we know how people feel about being able to voice their thoughts. I know there's a lot more to say there, and I won't go further. I think in summary, I would say it really does start with making it one of those beliefs or cultural values. And behaviorally, you are hearing and seeing people talk about it regularly, and you're also hearing them ask you for feedback regularly too.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like there's not just one and done strategy of checking the box to say, okay, we're asking folks for feedback in the engagement survey, or we just asked in, a company all hands if anyone had any questions, but we didn't get any feedback, so there's no feedback out there. Probably not the case.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of that. It almost becomes, if it's that company all hands, that quarterly all hands, as an example, somebody asks, it almost feels inauthentic in that case. And it's also, you kind of get into some of the, I won't get into the nuance here, but if you also even just saying that question, like, what feedback do you have for me? That's a hard question to answer because it's not specific enough. You're like, you're great. I can't think of anything right now. You're fine. Or, if you ask, what feedback do you have about how effectively we communicate here at the company? Chances are I'll probably say something pretty fast, like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, I do have some feedback there. I might be recognizing some ways that we communicate really well. I might also have some ideas about how we can communicate even better. I might have some personal feedback where my manager communicates with me. But yeah.
No, I think that's definitely really interesting, especially because I think managers often ask the question, what are your thoughts? What feedback do you have for me, especially when they're in that role? And if it's a team who's not, who's also not a manager, it's someone on your direct team or cross-functionally.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of leaders at a company as well. And you want to make sure that all voices are heard, but at the end of the day, folks might not feel like they can speak up. How do you kind of train managers to foster that environment and be super intentional about giving and receiving feedback? I feel like you have a whole workshop on that at Flouracity, but what are your thoughts there?
Christina, I feel so seen. Yeah, I have many thoughts here, particularly being, I guess, another fun fact about me for everyone to know is I was the former head of manager effectiveness. I was the head of manager effectiveness at Facebook for many years before I started my company. I think with managers, I think a couple things. If I put my kind of head of L&D hat on or head of people hat on, I think when a manager, we see a couple different flavors, right? When you have hired somebody externally into a people manager role in a company versus if you've recently promoted somebody, or if becoming a manager isn't a promotion, it's just something that you're interested in doing. It's kind of parallel career paths where you are an individual contributor in a company and you've suddenly become a people manager. Kind of two different categories. I think an advantage that the internal folks have is that they already have a sense of what the culture is. And so you really don't have to get them. If feedback is already a part of your culture, they've already adopted that. And they're like, yeah, great, not a surprise. If you've got new managers coming in as part of the onboarding process, whatever a company's onboarding program looks like, or if you're a smaller company, if that onboarding program is, yeah, I met with them for 90 minutes on the first day that was onboarding, we've got to be talking about feedback and letting managers know that it's an expectation and really what we do with the feedback, the context for why we ask it, all of those things. I remember a leader once at Facebook made me smile when he said this. He said, he was explaining to a group of new managers, we had him as a featured guest in manager onboarding. And he said, look, the analogy that I'll use around feedback is, if feedback is a gift, I got to tell you, it's Christmas Day every day here. And you've got to get used to that. And folks in the room smiled and they were like, okay, wow. Like some was a smile with delight, like, because that wasn't their experience in their former life. Others were like, ooh, what do you mean by that? And so being able to really just unpack that in onboarding while people are still clean slate, excited, really, open, receptive to a lot of things, that's a great place. A second thing that I would say is, it really gets into the skill of giving feedback. And there's an important second skill there that I don't think we talk about enough, and that's receiving feedback. So really exploring our own relationship with feedback. And this is where the The executive coach part of me, the Hudson coach part of me lights up, because in a one-on-one conversation, you can pretty easily get people to talk about that. In a group conversation with other managers, it's harder because it's personal.
Right.
My experience has been that a lot of managers just haven't, not because they haven't wanted to, it's not that either. I find most managers at any company, if you talk about the Acme company, are hungry for learning. They want to learn. They want to do a great job with their team. They want to make a difference. All of those things, but they haven't necessarily been through an experience or a program or peer coaching or anything that's specifically about the skill of giving feedback and what that looks like. And lots to say there, and I won't go there yet. The third thing I think is really from a systems perspective, that feedback also can't be that's that thing that the L&D, learning and development team, talks about, or that's that thing that the HR team talks about, or that's that workshop we did. That when it comes to performance time, that part of the process is you are actively getting peer feedback, as an example. Transparently, it's not kind of this. I think we probably both, and many folks listening, you've been in a performance review before, and you were like, well, your manager said something like, well, feedback from your cross-functional partners is that you're not always as responsive as they'd like you to be, or something like that. And you're like, well, why am I hearing this for the first time? I have no context here. Why didn't they just tell me? And we could do something about it. We could talk about it. So I think there's something about building it into your processes where you are getting feedback all year long too. So definitely as part of the performance review process, and I'm a huge believer in the transparency there, that you're getting it, but also, the introduction of lightweight tools where we can give feedback in the moment. And one that comes to mind for me is recognition. Like if you have a tool where you and I just complete a project together, I'm like, Christina killed it on that project, where I can actually just quickly go to a tool or go to a form or whatever it is. It could be hacky. Go to something where I can specifically say and have it shared with you and with your manager. Let me tell you specifically about the behaviors that Christina demonstrated that really had an impact on this project. Boom, in the moment recognition. It's light. I could probably write it in 15 minutes. And you get great feedback that helps you in your role. It helps our relationship. Your manager probably is, most managers are just unaware. They can't keep track of everything going on in the directs' lives.
Right, especially
it helps them too.
No, absolutely. And you're building up that muscle of I'm giving positive feedback. It's not just negative feedback all the time, like you mentioned, the F word, which I think folks are sometimes, myself included, afraid of as well, and don't know how to respond, or it's this awkward thing. So I think that's definitely 365 days a year. You want the feedback, you want the positive, negative, and in between as well. In terms of, we talked about workplace and just company feedback too. Are there folks that you recommend just being on the other end, whether it's a DEI team? We talked about diversity and inclusion, HR people. Should everybody see this? What are your kind of best practices there?
Let's talk about employee experience feedback. A best practice for me is share it with everyone. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of companies, particularly in the day of social media, are like, oh my God, what if I share it and it gets out? Like, I feel this, I don't know if a lot of companies would use this word, though individual people would probably say it behind closed doors. Like, let's say that you score 50% on one dimension. You're like, I'm kind of ashamed of that. Like, I don't feel great that we scored that way in our engagement survey, as an example. And I think that the best thing that you can do is share it. To be like, hey, gang, company, here's what we're doing well. Here's some areas we got to work on. Let's talk about this 50% score against voice, as an example, or this 50% score against our mission or fulfillment, or whatever the category is. One, it demonstrates this isn't just this check the box survey you did. Actually, each time it happens, we read it, we do something about it, we talk about it, and really, as a company together, we're modeling all of our voices matter on this, and we all need to come together to do something about this, and we're taking it seriously. If it does, for the I think of a few clients that worry, like, well, what if this gets out there in the world? Great. You already talked about it immediately, and you have the conversation externally too. Yeah. 50% people feel like they can't voice how they're feeling in our company. And we have a problem with that. That's not how we want to be. And it leads to this really great external conversation too. I think the transparency all around helps. I was in a company kickoff as a guest for a different client earlier this week, and we were talking about diversity and inclusion. And I shared something that I think actually relates to what we're saying here too, and it's essentially when we talk about something, whatever it is, we talk about that feedback that we're not happy about in this case.
Right.
What's really great is we make it safe for other people to talk about it too. It's not this, oh, let's hide it, work on it, and keep it hush hush. It's like, look, we are all imperfect, messy human beings in the end. Companies are all imperfect, messy, amazing, smart, flawed, all of it. We can't just talk about the amazing, smart stuff. We got to talk about the flawed stuff too. That's what keeps us connected and human.
Absolutely. And I think that relates to that proactivity piece of just because it's not acknowledged either to the employee or the company doesn't mean it's not still happening. And I don't know that the company is working on it as well if I'm the person who shared the feedback or just made the suggestion as well. So I think my voice is not heard. I'm not included in the company whose voice is being heard right now. I see all of these things happening. And then I chat to my coworkers and just it's a pervasive thing that's happening. And odds are I'm going to go to Glassdoor or I'm going to tell my friends or just something else about something that could have easily been fixed or it's being fixed right now. I just didn't know about it. It's communication. Communication two-way is definitely key.
Yes, and you nailed it with two-way for sure. It's kind of not a one-way push. And I think the many things that I'm grateful for and love about more companies focusing on diversity and inclusion right now is it helps people make a connection to then, well, for some underrepresented communities, already you don't feel heard. Like coming in the door every day, before you even got to the company, you're like, I am not seen or I am not heard. And then internally within the company, it becomes even more important for you to see and feel like, but I am heard here. And that alone, that lights up something in people that feels like you care about me, you get it, you value me, and most importantly, you see me for who I am, and you value my voice. That I think in the end, for most employees, I think three of the things I would say that matter most is I feel heard, my voice feels valued, and I feel respected because of that. I feel recognized and appreciated for what I bring. And also, I feel like I am contributing to something bigger than me that's meaningful, really tapping into purpose. I think so many companies, being in the Bay Area here in California, can easily shift to, well, there's RSUs and you get the food, and oh my God, the free dry cleaning. The free dry cleaning is amazing. But all these things, that's actually what endless studies show, that's not why people stay. That's not what keeps them there. It's the other three.
And that's especially right now, it's people need to be evolving their strategies for if you only have Zoom or Slack or these functional channels where you can give feedback, have this conversation that's two-way as well. Have you been working with companies that are asking how they should be just changing their strategy, even if it's just slightly in terms of ensuring that employees feel heard, managers are making time for them, and folks aren't experiencing Zoom fatigue? There's just these layers we didn't have to think about before, but now it's just, I don't know, it's all top of mind for everybody. It's different.
It is. And it's funny, even on the Zoom side, I have in this virtual world we're all in, which we will always be in, I hope, some of it, not 100%. Let's go for a good 50%. But it's even when it comes to feedback, as an example, I have been surprised at in conversations with managers or others, you're like, by the way, when you're giving feedback virtually, turn your camera on. Like if you're kind of this black Zoom screen and you're just hearing like Bosley from Charlie's Angels just trying to give you this feedback, like I need to be able to see you when you're giving it, because it's even more important for me to kind of be able to read your body language and the emotion and the feeling in it. And if that's not already a practice of giving feedback in the company, virtually it's even harder, because that in-person connection piece is different. I don't know if I think it's more difficult. I think it's different. If you're not flexing that muscle enough, it's going to feel awkward, separate from the fact that you're also doing it via video. And then separate from the fact if you don't have your video on, like, yeah, that's not leaving anybody feeling #great about that.
Absolutely. There's some Zoom etiquette. There's some video etiquette here. It's person to person. And I do miss that face-to-face time as well. I'm also a big component of at least 50% and just, when everything is a little bit safer as well. So I definitely think that's important for folks to know as well, especially for maybe negative or constructive feedback. But I'd love to kind of go back to something you mentioned earlier in terms of, okay, we say, we acknowledge that you gave this feedback. We hear you. We want to work on it. How do you measure that kind of success of saying, okay, this company, this manager, or the individual peer that I gave feedback to is, taking this actionable result and they actually did hear me as opposed to just saying it and forgetting it in a sense?
Yep. There's a lot of different ways I can answer this. I'll start with my engagement hat on, my employee engagement hat on, regardless of the tool that folks are using. So we'll pick one of my favorites. I love Culture Amp for Culture Amp users out there. I've been a fan for a while now. And I think back to the transparency, if you are regularly, you as the company leader, as the chief people officer, the head of HR, all the execs, all of them really, the chief people officer is just the one who services it because engagement typically falls in their world. You're seeing the snapshot of this point of time when this score was this. And if you've already set a benchmark of a realistic benchmark, like if you scored, we'll talk about collaboration as an example. If collaboration is the one that you got 50%, you're like, we're hitting 80 next cycle. Well, you're not. That's a pretty big jump. Like that change takes time. And if you have, a metric where you're like, well, let's look for a 4% increase. If we got a 4% increase and we consistently show a 4% increase over time, it feels a little more doable. So it's like, one, having some type of hypothesis and some type of reality check on the variance, how much you want to move a metric feels important. I think the second thing is, again, sharing it. So everyone knows we're talking about it openly. Like we're like, oh yeah, God, that score is not well. Oh, I'm already thinking how that shows up in my organization or in my function, in my team. We're talking about it. I think the third thing is that you've got to hold each of your senior leaders accountable for then having their own all hands, their own fireside chats, their own conversations within their organizations to look at how that score changed. So it might be, I'll randomly pick on words here, within the product team, actually it wasn't a problem, but the collaboration score was 80%. Oh, that's interesting. But still have the conversation like, hey, well, what are we doing well? Because we don't want to lose that. Like, we know this is a theme for the company. The conversation might become, well, how do we work with some of our cross-functional partners on this and help? How do we make sure we don't slip? You might look at a different org, like I'll stay in the product world, engineering, in this Acme company example, it's engineering's like, well, actually ours is 40%. Okay, well, what we need to talk about that kind of as a function, as a family, like being very honest. Okay, what's showing up? Does this, one question that comes up for me, is this a surprise to anybody? And if people are like, no, okay, what prevents us from talking about it? What are some of the obstacles? What would it take to change those? If people come back with 20 great things, okay, 20 is a big number. What are the 3 things that we can do? And really keep continuing to cascade that down so that ideally what would be, if I work for you, what I want to hear in a team meeting from you, I don't want to be like status update, project, boom, boom, boom. When I just saw this feedback, when you come in and sit down and say, well, so we saw the results about collaboration. I saw our results for our team. The score was this. This hour today is about talking about it. What patterns are we seeing? What obstacles are we seeing? What role am I playing? What role of each of us? Like really developing this sense of ownership and kind of all the way back up, like sharing, here's what we're focused on. Here's what we're focused on. Here's what all of my works are focused on. And keeping the conversation going. I don't think there is well, if you just do this, it's do solve, collaboration's fixed. It's always, I use file save as a lot. It's always going to be a file save as for each function. And it's always going to be a file save as by company. And it's always going to be a file save as based on the feedback that came up, the overall score and the comments, the themes, all of that. So that's one of the biggest metrics I think a company can look at is, when push comes to shove, is that number changing? Another thing I think, like, let's say if it's me and you're my manager and you're having a hard conversation with me where you're like, Tom, your upward feedback, very consistent theme that people don't feel like they can give you feedback, as an example. Or, and when we did look at our employee engagement scores, the feedback score for your team was low. I really want to talk to you about this. This feels very important to me. What are your reflections on it since you're seeing this? What are it's almost like you can slip into coaching mode. What would need to change? What would you need to do differently? What skills would you need to work on? How can I help you with that? How can the team help you with that? What conversations can you have? And what I'm looking for, what you'd be looking for in that case, if you're having a hard and very important conversation with me about that, is, am I seeing behavioral change? Am I seeing feedback start to change? What am I seeing in the virtual and or eventual in-person environment of how people are interacting? But I think a lot of times, for a lot of managers and leaders, we think we gave you the feedback, or we gave you like really bad feedback that was kind of vague. And we're like, what do I do with that? Without being explicit about it, the importance of it, the specificity of it, and having the conversation about it gets us feeling like we own it together and accountable. Without that, it doesn't really change. So it's accountability at all levels, from that one-on-one manager who really is not feeling great about the feedback they just got, to the company perspective or the functional perspective, that feedback that we're not feeling great and how it's showing up in each of our orgs or in our company overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you said so many actionable nuggets in there that folks can do, turning the intangible into the tangible of just measuring your success and having realistic metrics. Again, I feel like a lot of companies do have these 20 goals that they want to hit, increase by 50%. But it's talking about being realistic and, again, continuing to have that conversation. And I appreciate what you said about when you're giving someone feedback. How can I help you with this? This is why we think this is important. And it's, again, not just saying, well, you do a bad job at this. It's just making it a little more active too. And I know that we have previously talked about implicit bias, and when you have different managers, different team members, folks coming in from different backgrounds, coming in from different organizations, you have all of these different layers of, you could be the best person in the world who gives feedback, but everyone is bringing their own experiences into that room, right? And I feel that a lot of folks are sharing more openly, whether it's with friends or team members, about kind of microaggressions they face. And a lot of times it's not, necessarily illegal activity like the harassment or, the things that we were talking about earlier. What relationship do you see with microaggressions, which are a very real thing, and feedback? It's definitely an awkward thing, but what do you think there?
Yeah. I joke sometimes I don't smoke, but sometimes I feel like I need a virtual cigarette. I might need to light my virtual cigarette for this one. I encourage everybody else out there watching this. We all might need a virtual cigarette for this. Several things come up for me. One is when I think about if I put my diversity and inclusion learning hat on or training hat or managing bias as a program that I facilitate with several companies. That's about the skill of interrupting bias. Microaggressions, I continue to be amazed at what a hot topic that is. And being fully transparent, a humble hot topic, particularly for people in the majority. So it's not a hot topic. If you experience microaggressions on a regular basis, you're smoking a cigarette in the session because you're like, welcome to my life. I hear that every day. Mm-hmm. Versus if you are, a straight white man, you just don't hear them. So they're not apparent to you, not because you are intentionally trying to do them. I find it's generally not that either. You walk through the world differently. And so what I have found a lot is like a kind of a foundational starting place is getting people clear together and anchored on what a microaggression is. Because that term also, kind of like the F word, feedback, you hear it and some people are like, oh, I read that article about that. Ooh, it burned me, or I don't really know what that is. It's because we don't really talk about what they are.
Right.
When I talk about them, I think of it's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's one microaggression in and of itself is just that slice, that painful slice. If you only got it once, you only heard it from one person, chances are, you bouncing back from that might be easier. If you hear it every day or multiple times throughout the day, it's the same one, or they kind of have this same theme around them, it starts to pile up. And I think if you are in the majority, if you are, white, if we just use ethnicity / race as an example, you don't hear them as much. So it can kind of feel like, why are you making a big deal about this? But it's that empathy piece of putting yourself in the other person's shoes and being like, well, do you realize how often I hear this? And to be clear for folks who are like listening to this, and they're like, well, the microaggression again, what is that? Common ones that are often spoken about are, I don't see race, I'm colorblind, as an example. Or God, gay men are so sensitive. Or Asians are great at math. They're kind of making a joke around that. Or it's, I admire you so much. Your disability is such an inspiration. And people are like, but I mean it, it's inspiration. Well, really take a hot second and think about what you might not realize you're conveying with the essence of that microaggression too. So it's giving people some examples and the safety, which is tough for everybody in the room to talk about. Let's ask some questions. Let's get clear on, do we know why I don't see race? I'm colorblind. Why that's problematic for various communities. So there's that. I think with feedback, if I think of the situation, this is a very meta. I definitely need to take a drag off my virtual cigarette for this one. If you are on the receiving end of a microaggression, it might not even be feedback. Like it might just be like, I say a microaggression to you and you just received it and you're asking yourself, do I say something? Do I offer some feedback? Do I take a moment to talk about it? I know for me, as a gay man, there are days sometimes where I will say something, and there are other days where I'm like, I can't even.
Not today.
Not today. Not doing it, or not with this person. Not with that person. Mm-mm. So there's this process that the receiver goes through. I also think there is a process that the initiator goes through. I saw this done beautifully once in a cross-functional meeting where the leader leading the room, I can't even remember at this point what she said, but she said something that was definitely a microaggression, and it came out, and she said it, and she turned around and she said, that came out all wrong. And she went like this, can I start over? And you could feel the relief in the room. Like people were like, sure, water off a duck's back. The acknowledgement is what mattered, and that she caught herself, and that anybody who was on the receiving end of the room could talk with her about it. Then like, hey, thanks. Like I really appreciate that. And we can talk about it now. I think the most difficult is, and there's a very important study from the University of Kentucky, I believe, that this was revealed in a study. The witness has the most sway in this case. Sway in that when we witness something, regardless of what our own community is, we're pretty neutral. We weren't the one that received it. We saw it. We have an opportunity to speak on the recipient's behalf and to give feedback in the moment that might be like, hold up. We'll make up a person. Sanjay, when I hear you say that you don't even see Kayla as Black, I find myself worrying if you are implying that you are colorblind. I just wanted to check in. Kayla, I'm hoping that's okay for you. Kayla, I'm noticing you just got really quiet. That interruption gives Sanjay a chance in this example to be like, oh, whoa, no, I didn't. Or, what are you talking about? What do you mean? That's not what I meant at all. Whatever the reaction is. But the witness then is offering feedback, giving a chance for the receiving end to speak up or not. It might be that day where you're like, I'm good, not going there, not talking about it. But the witness plays, I think, a pretty important role with microaggressions, and oftentimes being the sharer or the raiser of raiser, R-A-I-S-E-R, not the other way.
Not the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not cutting anybody, but of giving feedback. Last thing I'll say, and I know I've said a lot, I think the way it can show up in a performance evaluation, or in other ways, is the L word. Give us another word today. Labels. So if it's that, we'll keep using Kayla as an example here. Kayla, one of the things you'll notice in your review is you've got to work on your collaboration. A lot of your cross-functional partners said that you often come across as aggressive. And if Kayla is a Black woman, that is a problematic label that Black women have to deal with every day. It's also incredibly not helpful. I can also tell Kayla, they have feedback for you that you are a strawberry, and I need you to stop being a strawberry. And what's a strawberry? What?
That's not helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I like strawberries, but what they don't like strawberries? Like what? It's like, what's the specific behavior? Get away from the label. Stay away from the labels. Carol Ann, if I go poltergeist, stay focused on the specific thing you're seeing, because Kayla can do something about that. I can do something about it. You can do something about it. It might be that, actually, Kayla, you send emails every day at 8:00 in the morning asking for an update on the deadline. And when you do that it feels persistent. I feel stressed. Can we meet once a week to talk about status and deadlines? It's stuff like that a lot, which that we can all do something about. That has nothing to do with ethnicity or race or anything else. It's about the behaviors. It's about, most importantly, growth, what we can learn and grow from.
Exactly. And I think that's a key theme here too, in terms of having a growth mindset, whether you're a leader, manager, CEO. It doesn't mean people are in that category of they're a good person, they're a bad person, they're great at giving feedback, they suck at giving feedback. There's always that opportunity to have that learning moment, acknowledge, like you said in your example as well, and make sure that your team members and the folks that you work with as well, whether they're on your direct team or not, feel like they're included, feel like their voice is heard as well. I know we're running close on time, so I just have one more kind of question for you, a little fun one as well, is do you remember what the best and kind of hardest feedback you received is, whether you were a manager, individual contributor?
Yes, I can. Actually, it's fun. I think so. I challenge you to this. Ask this question to other people also.
Okay.
And do a test. I think you'll be surprised. We can usually think of both, and we usually have a lot of examples of both. Let's talk about one of my worst first. I'll save the best for last, because the best was feedback that truly delighted me because it resonated with me so much, and it's true. The feedback that did not stick well for me, it was a label, and it did hint at a microaggression, unfortunately, but it was around sensitivity. And so it was around, Tom, you need to stop being so sensitive when others have feedback on X thing. And that really, I remember in the moment I asked, okay, I'm hearing you say I'm sensitive. What does that mean? What does that look like? Can you give an example? And my manager in that case kept saying, I can't. And I was like, well, I don't know what to do about it, and I want to do something about it. And my manager's response is, I know what you're trying to do right now. And I said, what am I trying to do? She's like, well, you're like doing the feedback thing. And I'm like, I'm doing it because I don't want to come across as sensitive. And I need to understand, what's the context? Is this all the time? Every time you sit with me, you're like, oh, God, the man's sensitive. Or is this on this one project? I think I kind of have an idea of what this might be coming from. So it's like I had to work as a receiver. I had to work really, really, really hard to get clear on what it was. Come to find out, it was one person sharing it on one project, not a mega theme. And I just had to talk with them about it. The part two of that, to folks out there, which we all know this is hard, is having the follow-up conversation later, in that case with my manager, which we did, and they took it great. It led to this really meaningful conversation of, can we talk about that word? Let me tell you some things from my community gay men deal with, but that word doesn't feel great. By the way, do you know it doesn't feel great for many other communities too? And let's talk about it. It was so good. So it was like some of the worst feedback I got, but with I don't want to say with a happy ending, with a meaningful ending where it evolved our relationship.
Yeah, an impactful ending for sure.
Yeah, I've never forgotten it. And I feel very fondly about that person too, where I would call them tomorrow and jump on the phone and partner with them and all sorts of things. So it ended up not being harmful to our relationship. Okay, the best feedback I got. If she listens to this, I'll say her first name, so she'll know. Kate. Okay. This is for you, Kate. I had a manager once who said I had just given this big presentation, kind of high stakes, 12 people in the room, and I had to explain something. They had questions about something that was very complex and very difficult. And I explained it. The good news is I explained it, which led to more questions, and I kept explaining. And one of the reasons I kept explaining is because I love it. I love what we were doing. And in our next one-on-one, she said, so how did you think that meeting went? And I said, well, there were some things that went well in it. I feel like it was kind of all over the place at times. And I don't know. I'm like, myself, even I felt a little lost at times. I probably could have stayed on track a little bit better in it. And she was smiling. She said, Tom, I experience you as the clockmaker. She said, you have the urge to take the clock apart because you love the clock. And you want to tell me every single piece in the clock. And I noticed in the meeting when you were describing this, you got really excited and you were telling the room about how it would work. I'm with you because we talk about it. But it's like we were all the way down the train. They're still on the platform. And Tom, all they wanted to know is what time it is.
Oh my God.
I could not stop laughing at first. I was giggling. And then we still to this day have a joke. Or what she would do very playfully, loudly in an open cube farm too. She'd walk by and be like, especially if she saw me intently working on something, glasses on, Tom, what time is it? 3:00, Kate. Like, I just yell it out. But one of many masterful things about her as my manager in this case is she also knew me so well that she knew the key to me with giving feedback. For me personally, humor and metaphor. Like, I could not have had a manager make me feel so me with the feedback. I got it immediately. To this day, I'm the clockmaker. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I really got to watch it. I probably did some clockmaking on this session today that folks watch it be like, yeah, he did share a lot of details there that maybe I didn't need. I don't know, but that's the best feedback I've ever gotten.
I feel like you shared just enough details, and folks who are listening are going to take away some really good nuggets in here about the F-word feedback. It's not a bad thing. You can use it as your greatest tool to improve your culture, be more inclusive, and again, as an individual, have that growth mindset of you can always do better. When you know better, you do better, and that's what we're here to be. That's what we're here to do.
Yes, exactly.
Tom, we are at the end. We are at the end of our discussion. Thank you so much for being a guest on Reimagining Company Culture. We really appreciate it. You can reach out to Tom if you have any questions after this, concerns, feedback. At AllVoices,
Yes.
At AllVoices, we believe in the empowerment of employees to speak up. We know that creating a place where employees feel they can speak up is a need to have, not a nice to have, in order for everyone to be successful. Thanks for giving this podcast a listen, and we'll see you on the web. Have a good rest of your day, Tom.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here, and thanks everybody for tuning in.